Good evening, everybody. My name is Steve, amateur radio call sign K2GOG. I'm one of the founders of the Hudson Valley Digital Network. You can learn a little bit more about HVDN by visiting the website at www.hvdn.org. This is a bi-monthly presentation series. This month, we are joined by Nolan, N2WU, who will be sharing details about the most recent high-altitude balloon launch, which took place on February 12th. And when we get to roughly about, again, the halfway point, we'll pause and take some questions, and then we'll continue onward. So with that, let me turn it over to Nolan. If you want to make your slides full screen, I'll send it over to you when you're ready.
All right. Does that work?
Yep, you're good.
Okay. Yeah, I can't see any of the chat windows, so I kind of need you, Steve, to give me indicators there.
Yep, I'll be the moderator. I got you. I got you covered.
All right. Thanks everyone for coming. So I'm going to show you guys the Astronomy Club AY22 balloon launch. This is the first we're going to do this semester. We have another one coming up soon. We'll kind of share what was new about this launch and what was special about it. The milestones that we set in our actual launch, the payloads that we put in our launch, our retrieval efforts, the recovery efforts, the data that we learned after it, and then kind of some follow-on steps for next launch. And of course, kind of the organizations that are all behind this, the SMDC on the left over here, Space Missile Defense Command, show kind of the Army space assets and how we function. High altitude is very important to kind of the space domain and what technology goes there and how we operate. The middle two, just our West Point clubs, astronomy and West Point amateur radio. They go hand in hand in that balloon launch using APRS and radio to track it. Then Army Cyber Institute, obviously with the radio signals in the electronic spectrum, and those have a really big impact in the Army as well. So here's a little bit of background for you. So the organization that we have, Cadet Amateur Radio Club, W2KGY, we're actually the oldest club on post. So we started in 1932 with the call sign W2JIG. So 10 to 12, I think that number is a little bit higher now, probably 12 to 15 cadets per semester via the Laurel licensing service. We still do that while it's still free. So eventually, once that $35 fee comes in, our numbers will be decimated, but we're riding that high for now. But really what we do as a club is kind of combine our ham radio with military training. So all cadets know how to use kind of an Army radio, but do they know how it works, and do they know how to apply that when they're officers? And that's where we come in, is we show them, here's this military radio, here's this propagation, here's a different frequency spectrum, and we encourage them to get their license. We also have an impressive station as well. I'm standing at it right now. You can see our geochron in the back there. But we have a Flex 6700 with a power amp, a mid-tri 40 on the roof, a satellite rig, an ICOM 9700 as well. We have all sorts of toys to play with as well over here. So that really just gives us the best opportunity to learn how to use and control that spectrum. So a little background on me. Nolan Pierce. My call sign is N2WU. That says soon. That's from last year when I had a different call sign. Ham since 2018 from Cleveland, out in 8-land. I'm electrical engineering and then a space science minor at West Point. I'm a senior right now. I'm graduating in about 3 months. Not that anyone's counting. The cadet in charge of the Amateur Radio Club and the Astronomy Club. So I really like that overlap there with the high altitude balloon. Active member on the triathlon team. I get my APRS in that way. And then I have a lot of SOTA, CW, and QRP interests. So really where I come in as a regular hobby ham is just CW operating in low power situations, especially on mountaintops. I'm a big fan of that. And then I also have a website, n2wu.com, to put all my projects, all my SOTA excursions on there. And there's a picture of me with Bob, WB4 APR. So bottom line up front, the USMA Astronomy and our amateur radio clubs successfully designed, built, and tested our 12th high-altitude balloon to train our cadets on mission planning and conduct that high-altitude research. So we had 14 total cadets attend, 4 faculty from both those astronomy clubs and the amateur radio clubs. We had 4 cadets who had ham radio license and then 3 faculty, which was very impressive. And they were all licensed through Laurel, through me somehow, which was really fun, really interesting. We designed, simulated, and built that high-altitude balloon with astronomy and radio-related research modules. So I'll kind of share the breakdown of what goes into that, what actually is a balloon, and what constitutes all the projects that go inside it. We launched on 12 February. I think it was just about 30 degrees outside, so it was a pretty nice day. It actually turned out to be really windy, and I'll share that in a little bit. We launched at 9:45 out at Minersville High School in Minersville, PA, which was a whole 3.5-hour drive from West Point. So we woke up, I think we tried to leave at about 4:30 a.m. to get out there. Now, we landed about 13 or 1400. I'll share that story as well, and we had to recover it on 19 February, the week after, because it was stuck in a tree. The whole purpose of it is to conduct altitude experiments and teach cadets about mission planning required for the space domain. So it was really important there, just the mission planning, what's required behind it, how you manage such a large-scale operation, and how you move that equipment, and then all the safety concerns with hydrogen as well. Here's kind of a quick data overview of what we're looking at. This was the largest KML I've never seen for the balloon launch, that encapsulated all of Long Island inside of it just to get that single screenshot. That was insane. All of Pennsylvania as well. Like, you can see the Finger Lakes up in New York all the way up here. I'll get my laser pointer out. They're like the Finger Lakes, so you can see the entire almost state of New York enclosed with our just our balloon launch. So Minersville all the way down here, crossed over. It's in about New Jersey, right about here, and then passed directly over the Stewart Airport at 50,000 feet, crossed the Hudson River, kept going through Connecticut, was over in Massachusetts in Springfield, and then passed briefly through Rhode Island as well, and then landed right north of Rhode Island in Sharon, Massachusetts. So 6 total states that launched through there. That is a record for us. So this was a record-setting launch, and I'll share that. But 6 total states that went through, which we've never seen before. But you can really see these are equal time slots, so you can see that it was just flying, going east based on that wind, and then it actually slowed its lateral movement, going up, climbing more, but still had that constant ascent rate. So what we really want to see is a higher ascension up and then a quick ascension down. That way we can actually launch and grab it without driving 6 hours or 12 hours in a day like we did. We did reach a max elevation of 104,000 feet as well. So this data is all available on APRS. It's a KML file, so feel free to play with it as you'd like. All right, let me advance the slide. There we go. So the payloads. So we actually did something new this year. We usually do what's called a shuttle concept, where we cram all sorts of different payloads, modules, sensors, radio modules, all into a single styrofoam box, tie that to a balloon and launch it. This year, we actually used a string of successive payloads. So each was about, I would say, a 25-inch square box made out of foam core, what you would make poster boards out of. We borrowed from a highly successful group in Boulder, Colorado, that launches about 350 of these. Every time they do it, they do the same thing. They do these little boxes that have the modules inside. Everything's separate, and it allows them to go for a higher weight above a certain legal threshold and to customize it exactly how they like. So it's foam core, steel screws, and hot glue. You can see the picture there where the laser pointer is. You can kind of see it here as well. But on the insides, I don't think Steve, is my camera on?
Your camera is not on.
Okay. I'll just turn it on in a little bit. I have the payload with me, but you can see kind of from that laser pointer there, it's got the Raspberry Pi right there. It's screwed in and it's mounted in. But foam core, steel screws, and hot glue is really what makes it go together. It's like building a net. And there were 3 total payloads that we launched. So a geospatial time dilation, GTD as we call it. So that looked at the difference between ground and between 100,000 feet and how time dilation would work, so how time progresses. It actually is based on the theory of relativity from Einstein, a little bit above my pay grade. So the group behind that is publishing in a conference, and they're actually presenting in a couple of weeks in Chicago. So they actually got usable data from it. Next was an Adsb Logger. Once these slides are sent out, I have the code that I wrote for the logger on my GitHub. N2WU is my username on there if you want to check it out. Adsb_logger, I think, is the code for it. But really, it just reads off of an RTL SDR and then software-defined radio, and then logs all the incoming airplane radar packets it receives. So we could actually see what packets, what airplanes came in, what time they were received, where they were coming from, where they were due, what altitude they were at as well. Then lastly, we had an SSTV live beacon. So SSTV, slow scan television, if you're not aware, is a way of encoding an image into a radio wave. So this payload, when it was on the ground, it worked. It would take a picture, and then send it out via a radio wave, just like the ISS would, as a little postcard to receive. So you'd receive an image of that the balloon took at its certain elevation, and it would have the timestamp, the GPS location, and the altitude with the W2KGY call sign.
Hey, Nolan, before you go into this slide, do you want to maybe unshare your screen, and then we can see your live video just to go back and show what the actual payload looks like?
Yeah, so I think you can see me now.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, so we can peek into these payloads together. I can't really see this is a good angle.
Yeah, that's a good. So what we're looking at, you have the RTL-SDR diagonal across.
Yep. So we have the RTL-SDR right here, diagonal across, and it's connected a little SMA cable there. And this is actually a J-pole antenna for 1 gigahertz. That's off the side of it. It broke right here, but it actually worked really well. It had a SWR about 1 to 2. Then if you can see more on the internals of the radio, there's a Raspberry Pi mounted on the left side as you're looking at it. I don't know if the screen's flipped or not. I have the pencil pointed at it. So the Raspberry Pi is what processes the data and logs it in the SD card. We have our batteries on the bottom because all the weight will be out on the bottom, the heaviest. It's the strongest point in the payload. And then we have an APRS tracker all the way kind of nestled around here as well. And that's a lightweight tracker that'll send our GPS position. And then, of course, we have a dipole antenna to send that APRS information on the outside.
Great, thank you.
Then, and then on the top and bottom, it's got this, I think they use it in wood screws or what they're called, but that's what lets us run our string through without it getting ripped or tangled. And then it's zip tied and hot glued as well.
All right, well, that definitely put things into size context. It was a very small payload compared to years past, which was what, by volume, 4 times larger than that?
Yeah, you could probably fit 6 or 8 of those inside the single one from last year. So this was interesting because it was like, what does this payload do? What are its contingencies? What backups do we have in place for just this device? And then do that 3 more times or 2 more times. So that was just a really interesting concept. Each had its own kind of theme and its own kind of system that went on it. So that was interesting to see. So something new that we did this launch, which we've never done before, usually we fill our balloons with helium just due to the safety aspect. Helium is used in MRI machines, and helium is really scarce to get now, and it's extremely expensive. So we actually took a page out of that EOSS book from Boulder and filled using hydrogen gas. So it was a third, a quarter percent of the price, and it has much higher lift, lighter weight, and a much cheaper cost. So we actually used hydrogen, although it is flammable. We did a lot of safety mitigation to be able to use it correctly. But overall, it was very successful using hydrogen, and I would recommend it. I think it's worth the extra effort because you should be doing all these things safe anyway. So it kind of overdrived us into actually doing things correctly and safely, installing things correctly, having our fittings, having all of our stuff together. So you can see me on the left here, fiddling with kind of the pressure valve on the hydrogen. So we're unscrewing that first step in, the regulator, so that we get adequate pressure. And you can see kind of this weird outfit I'm wearing. So that is a static reducing lab coat. What we really don't want is any sort of static buildup, like when you rub your socks on a carpet. And then we don't want any discharge of voltage that would potentially arc and then spark and ignite our balloon. So we wanted to eliminate all the static we could. We had grounding rods in place. We had anti-static everything, no nylon clothes, to try and make it as safe as possible. And then we use those PVC tubes because one of the biggest ways to make hydrogen more flammable is to mix it with oxygen in the air. So we used a series of PVC and tubes and completely interlocking to have 0 air flow through our hydrogen device at any time. So then you can see kind of the whole operation we had. We didn't even take the hydrogen out of our truck that we carried it in. We just left it right in there. We didn't want to mess with moving it around. Right off the side, we put our tube on, and here it fills into the balloon. Right it screws in with PVC, so it's really easy to use. And then we just close the latch and unscrew it when we're done. The hood's up on this truck because we're using the engine block as a ground to eliminate that static buildup. Then if you look closely, and I'll show this again, there's kind of a tool bag here. And that's a pre-measured weight so that we know exactly how much it needs to fill because our tool bag will be buoyant off the ground. And that is also kind of where our issues with this launch came from.
One quick one quick thing, Nolan. At the bottom of your screen, there's a little window. Just hit the hide button, and then it'll make that disappear. Perfect.
Okay.
Right, keep going.
Yeah. So I think I'll go through this slide, and then we can stop for questions. So there were some significant challenges we had in this launch. Everything here was new. We haven't done this before. I was taking a page out of the book out of Boulder because they've launched 350. I thought it was about time we kind of upgraded and overhaul our challenges. So I always say Murphy's Law has to happen. It only has to happen once. If we get all our mistakes out in one launch, we're never going to make those mistakes again as long as we mitigate them and record them. So some successes we did have liftoff. That is always a great thing. Although it was much later than expected, we ran into a lot of issues with our PVC fittings, our timing, just our payload kind of delivery system. We were close to our target altitude of, I think this spreadsheet said 115 kilofeet. So we were at about 104. Last year, we only got to about 74,000. So much better and much closer. And it was a safe launch, which is always a pride of our launch, is that no injuries due to this hydrogen gas because we correctly mitigated that risk. There were a lot of failures, though. So we had challenges in those new connectors. We had a big late start, which really delayed. The wind increased as it got later in the day, which would just make our launch go further and further out. And you'll see we really got just the longest launch we've ever seen. Because the balloon was also underfilled and hanging in that wind, it just blew across 6 states just due to that wind increase. And then we had an error with some of our new members of the astronomy club not looking at battery polarization when they inserted the batteries and kind of letting the genie out of our payloads and frying some of our boards. So there were some failures there. So I've got a picture slide here kind of the launch day and the launch morning. You can see that tool bag there in action. It was buoying off the ground here. We're getting ready to move it out. We moved it out over to our launch location, which was just kind of in a clear area. And then here it is kind of suspended in the air. And you can really see it's got the balloon, a parachute, and then it's got that little string of payloads right there. So yeah, at this point, I'll take any questions.
All right.
So
So thanks. This is really great, Nolan. So for anyone who has questions, take yourself off of mute. The button's on the bottom of your control bar. And then before you ask your question, please share your name and if you have an amateur radio call sign, just so we know who you are. So let's open up the floor for a few minutes. We'll take a couple of questions and then we'll move on. And I think, Sebastian, would you like to go first?
Yeah, good evening. I'm Sebastian, KI2D. Is this something that can be done or tried to be done by a high school? And what's the price, the budget, if that's the case?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So we have one of our counterparts who used to be in charge of this club actually launched one in Savannah as a part of a high school club or a middle school club. So really the filling gas is going to cost something. The latex is going to cost something. The parachute's going to cost something, but then foam core, Raspberry Pis, whatever, those are cheap. I would say $300 or $500 total, maybe for the launch, once you start investing in hydrogen and then the latex. But there's different sizes that you can scale. If you only want to launch a 100-gram balloon, it's much easier. Even those Mylar party balloons, they can go very far as well. It can scale as cheap or as high as you want. So we kind of go on the high end of our price because we're not paying for it, which is always good. But
you can do it
by high school.
You can do it by less than $1,000 in equipment, basically.
Absolutely. This launch was less than $1,000.
Thank you.
Great.
Yep.
Excellent question. Before we take another one, just to look at the chat bar, would you like to talk about the type of batteries that you used in this payload, Nolan?
Yeah, so when we overhauled this, I thought usually we use those Anchor phone chargers. Now, the problem with those phone chargers is they're smart. Once they sense a reduced current, like if you have a low power mode on your radio or your Arduino, they'll shut off. They'll just go from 2 milliamps to 0 milliamps, which completely turns off your device and will stop all your radios. So we use these 18650 lithium-ion cells in a battery holder with JST polarized connectors to try and solve that problem. The problem is that our freshmen and kind of our newer cadets on the project didn't notice the plus and minus on the battery and then stuck the battery in the holder wrong. So any efforts to polarize it or mark it, it kind of went by the wayside, which fried it. But for next launch, for the Raspberry Pis at least, they consume enough current that you can just use a smart charger. So we'll be using, it's almost the same size, a 5-volt, 2500 milliamp battery bank. So either of those will work. I swear more by these just because I know how it performs. I can do circuit analysis on it more so than the smart chargers. Yeah, and then something else I would add, battery temperature is going to change a lot overnight. It's going to change a lot how it goes into the altitude. The lowest temperature we got was negative 9 degrees Fahrenheit. That's really going to reduce your battery life. So you definitely need an overnight test or double the life that you think you're going to need for that test.
Excellent. If you want, I have an 18650 cell I could show for those that are not familiar with it.
Oh, yeah, I forgot my camera's off. I was holding one up.
Yeah, let me, if you do the unscreen share, I think that everyone should see me full. I've run into the exact same exact problem with the 18650 cells. If everyone can see me, if I'm full screen, am I full screen for you, Nolan?
Just full screen for me. Yep.
Yep.
I'm holding mine up as well.
So here's a good example. There's a couple different types of batteries. This one, it looks like a big AA battery. You could probably see the little nipple on the side of it, but not all of the cells have that. So it is super easy, as Nolan and team have learned, to put it in the exact wrong way. So definitely a good lesson learned. Yep. Unfortunately, it toasted your hardware. That's not good.
It did. Yep. Not our APRS transmitter, which was useful, but.
All right, very good. Do we have any other questions before Nolan continues on? Stephen, KJ5HY, would you like to ask a question?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm trying to get off unmute here. Did that work?
Yep. We hear you.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'd just like to add, I've been to, a lot of these over the years. Before we launch, that was the one thing that I did really quickly was once we turned on the payloads, I went back to my car, which had I have the Kenwood D710 radio, and we don't let that thing go unless we're getting packets from it. That's the bottom line of any launch. I let the cadets kind of do what they need to do, but we don't let it go unless we're getting valid APRS packets from the launch. We 1 year we actually had it where it was giving improper packets, and it turned out it was a voltage issue. But the worst case scenario for the balloon is you don't get any APRS packets out of it. So in this case, even though something fried, we knew something fried at the time because of an inverted battery. One of them, and I still have to sit down with Nolan to figure it out. One of them actually did was giving a very nice clear packet. So I was like, we're going to be able to track it. So I was definitely fine with letting it go. But that's a kind of it seems like a no-brainer thing, but really, like there's some very important things about this project, which is you want to be able to recover the payload. If you can't do that, then you've lost everything that you've sent up. So it's absolutely important to make sure that that's transmitting and you're receiving it on the ground with the ground radio. Generally, these are launched in places where there's no digipeater, so you can't check your cell phone to see if it's receiving. Sometimes you can, but you have to plan for it not to be that way. But as long as it's transmitting that APRS packet, at least you know that it's doing what it's supposed to be doing, so that you can go back and track it and find it wherever it lands.
Excellent insights. I think we have two other questions. Let's see. I think I saw. Where is qualifying? KH6UU. I think you had a question, and then Luke KD2TVS. So, where did KH6UU? If you're still there, if you have a question, just take yourself off of mute. We'd love to hear what you like to ask. Going once. All right, let's go to Lou in New Jersey, KD2TVS. Just take yourself off of mute, Lou, and ask your question.
Okay, you guys hearing me fine?
Yep.
Okay, good. Thank you, Nolan, for putting on this presentation. There was I guess I was following it that day with the APRS, and it was interesting to see what it was doing. And one question I got is actually because I guess Sebastian made the question about high schools doing this, but I guess you probably had to file a flight plan or something like that with the FAA so let them know that it was in the air, just in case you don't want to keep any air traffic away from it.
Yeah, so that is a good question. So we've looked a lot into the laws and regulations, and a lot of people have done the research on it. The FAA has a rule for you can fly your payloads exempt. You can fly weather balloons something called exempt, which as long as your single payload mass is under 3 kilograms, you don't need to file a flight plan or do a cloud cover check or weather analysis. So, I mean, as a combined weight, we were under 2 kilograms. But as an individual weight, our payloads are only weighing, this one came in at about 300 or 400 grams. So we were able to fly exempt. We did call them and let them know that we're launching a high altitude balloon, but it only spends about 10 minutes in that kind of flight area under 20,000 feet before it goes up, and then it's not really seen again until it hits the ground. Okay. There is no regulation or no exemption for tethered balloons. If you ever think about doing a tethered balloon, there's no weight limit or anything that will exempt you from FAA flight plan, airspace reserving, all of those headaches.
Maybe a quick follow-up question for you, Nolan. So with the flight plan, given the major change to the flight path, did you have to give updates since you were across multiple air traffic zones, or does that just go through like the FAA more of like a national scale?
Yeah, we would just say that you just file it with the regional office that you're launching from. And then, as I explained, my co-pilot had a master's in airplane radar and surveillance. So he kind of said that would just be broadcast across the entire air traffic network.
Fantastic.
And the group in Boulder that launches actually non-exempt payloads that are over 3 kilograms, they'll actually send their APRS packets to the FAA, and then the FAA will route those in a certain way.
Very interesting. All right, so we'll let you carry on with the remaining slides. We're right at the halfway mark at 8:30, so we're right on time.
All right. So then here's our flight. So if you see this spreadsheet right here was our lift calculation. I put in the weight from each of our payloads that we had, added up the weight. Then from that weight, you multiply that weight by 1.2 or whatever to get your velocity that you're rising up. And then you have your total weights and you have all those things. So really what we measure that tool bag at, as you saw in that other picture, 5.79 pounds right here where my laser pointer is. And so if that is buoyant with the balloon, basic physics says that once you put your actual payload on, which is lighter, you're going to have it ascend at that rate, that target rate that you're looking for. So jury's still out on this. There's a lot of kind of finger pointing or blaming going on, but we think there was an incorrect weight that we used for one of our payloads, or maybe we didn't account for our string weight. We didn't put a big enough fudge factor in, but our ascend rate was much slower than expected. So it said about 4 meters per second. We were only about 2 or 2.3 meters per second up. So that kind of having it not ascend as fast as we wanted really kind of just let the balloon get pushed by the wind all the way out across those 6 states. In that airstream, we saw it reach up to 130 miles per hour, which is extremely fast, as it saw in those APRS packets. And we had those batteries inserted incorrectly by those freshmen. They couldn't see the tiny little plus or minus on there. We had a backup for our APRS system, so we were able to transmit. It halted any of our data coming in from those 2 other payloads. Our superlatives there that we did pull off of our APRS records, you can see all that all here. The fastest descent is negative 84.1 meters per second. So that's what's called post-burst chaos. We had some pictures from previous launches. The balloon kind of shreds as it pops up in the atmosphere. It's a planned pop. We plan it to pop at about 110,000 feet. And then everything is getting tangled around and jumbled and tumbling towards the ground at terminal velocity until that parachute somehow makes its way out and inflates. And then it slows down the ascent rate much. And you can see that on our graphs as well, that it slows down tremendously. So this is kind of our only data that we really got was from our APRS telemetry beacons. from our Bionics MT3000s. They're they're extremely small. They operated off of a variable voltage, 5 to 9 volts or so. We'll do more manipulation in our studio and some graphs to really make available what little data we used. That'll be uploaded on my website as well. Now, kind of where the interesting parts go, our last uploaded position was in Foxborough, Massachusetts. That's near the Patriot Stadium, if you're familiar with that. And that was at 4,000 feet from our SSTV payload. So if you remember, we had 3 payloads going on. Our SSTV payload was in the middle. So that APRS beacon sent a packet out at 4,000 feet that it was at its position, and it was moving. But what we found is that it was actually in a tree in Sharon, Massachusetts, which is about 5 miles away across an interstate. So we needed actually Stephen KJ5HY, I spelled his call sign wrong, to go out to the launch site, out to where it was predicted to land, and just kind of drive around until he actually received one of those packets on the ground. There was no kind of APRS network out there, but as long as he got that packet on his radio, he could actually get the actual GPS position. Now that was about 5 p.m. in February, so it was almost getting dark by then. So he just got the GPS coordinates. I have the coordinates in another slide. He actually found it, and then he was able to just save that. He said, well, that's really, really high, so we should just come back another time and get it down. That's exactly what we did. So we had some climbing equipment. We came up and actually got it down. It landed in a state park in Massachusetts. So that was kind of the retrieval effort that we had with our club. What you can't really see is there actually is a cadet kind of stuck in this tree. He had a harness, a rope. It was all roped up. He was safe. No injuries getting up or getting down to get that payload out of there. Now, what is odd, and I'll show this on the next slide, is the only things that were in that tree were 2 payloads. Now, remember, we had 3 total payloads, a parachute, and what should be remnants of our latex. We only found 2 payloads in that tree, which was really interesting. So here's where CSI BalloonSat comes in. This is kind of the question we've all been scratching our heads about. So we know that our last transmitted packet, 4,000 feet in Foxborough, Massachusetts. That's what was uploaded on APRS. Now we found those 2 other payloads in Sharon, Massachusetts in that tree that we had to climb and get down that we had a valid APRS packet for. So that was just its drop down to the tree. Now what was missing was our parachute and our ADSB payload. But as you know, I have my ADSB payload right here with me. So an ATV rider, the same day that we were looking for it, actually found our ADSB payload, called us, and then we came and picked it up from him in Foxborough, which, like I said, was 5 miles away. So some competing theories we had. I'm curious to see what any of you guys would think on what actually happened between the 2. Is maybe a mid-flight separation between the parachute and the payloads. Now that doesn't make sense because there's no damage to any of the payloads from a supposed 2,000 or 4,000 foot vertical drop straight down, terminal velocity impacting into the ground. These payloads are perfectly fine, and we'll use them for next launch. And having one payload fall at Foxborough and then having another payload fall at Sharon 5 miles away without any sort of parachute isn't really calculable as well. And then why would it break at 2,000 feet? Why not 104,000 feet when the entire system is tumbling around and pulling and yanking? So that was another question which we were wondering about. The other theory is a migration, which is also plausible, but not. We're still wondering about this, wondering if an African or European swallow maybe migrated, or like we said, this ATV driver, maybe he was driving through and just picked it up off the ground and then decided to carry it with him. We don't know exactly where he was riding, but he called us from 5 miles away. Another idea that we had is that the entire system landed in a tree, but then strong winds on one of those days, if you remember, I think it was Thursday a couple weeks ago, really strong winds could have ripped that parachute out of the tree, made one of the payloads land on the ground that got migrated, and the parachute would have just disappeared. That's another possibility. But what we also still don't understand is we didn't actually see the parachute on the launch day when it landed. We couldn't actually see a bright neon green parachute. So we have to do more forensics analyzing, maybe do some fingerprint testing, some DNA analysis on these payloads to see what actually happened to it. We're glad that we have them all back. A little disappointed we didn't have as much data that we needed, but these payloads are in perfect shape to be put on our next launch. So what's in the future for us? Well, in April or so, April 9th tentatively, we have a crossband repeater going on. like a UV transponder like you'd see in a CubeSat, except this time on the payload that everyone will be able to use, and digital amateur television for any software-defined radio that'd be able to process that on the 915 megahertz spectrum. There'll be other radio payloads going on as well. It's going to be a much bigger launch, hopefully a much more successful launch. I'll be sure to label the batteries this time, positive and negative, so we don't have the same mistakes occurring. But any updates for the payload or the balloon sat, they'll be put on my website, ntw.com. But that is just about all I have, so I'll stand by for the rest of the questions. Thanks again for listening and coming.
Well, great. Again, Nolan, super detailed and super interesting stuff. I'm sure there's going to be a number of questions. It's 8:38, so I think we have quite enough time to go through some good questions, and we'll wrap up at 9 p.m. Eastern time. So if anyone has a question, please raise your hand and come off mute, share your name and your call sign if you have one, and hopefully it's something that Nolan or Stephen KJ5HY could answer.
I'm going to jump in with my question. Well, not a question, a comment. I do hope you do SSTV again. I left my radio trying to receive during the launch, and I was sad to see that nothing was transmitted. And I want to say that I remember looking at KJ5HY on APRS driving around Foxborough. We were looking at the APRS site and seeing his truck driving around, and we guessed that he was probably looking for the balloon. That was a fun thing from Sullivan County. We were talking about it.
Excellent.
Yeah, and
excellent.
so I can actually add on to that. What's really funny or kind of blows to my success is you can see that. Am I sharing my screen here? The tests that I did the night before, you can see are valid. Like we have timestamp data just sitting in our classroom for about 12 seconds. So it worked the night before, and then it went out to the launch site. You can see W2KGY is kind of cropped off down here, but you can see it's got altitude, temperature, longitude, latitude, all that data. There's a better image right here. Here am I just standing at it, staring at it in a classroom right before, like the night before it was ready to launch. So 02 in the morning Eastern time, or Universal time, so about 11 at night or 10 at night in its position. So it was going to work. So it really, if we just put it back on, check that nothing actually got fried, it should work again. And what's interesting is it'll also log data for every 10 seconds. It'll do a data pool of all this stuff and just log it, so we can get really detailed KML files as well.
Yeah, too bad, but good job. I mean, despite all the problems, that was an amazing effort.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, I think I'm just sharing Steve right now.
Yeah, it's like you're sharing me. Double. People are getting a double dose.
I'd say, Sebastian, this was one of the more impressive launches that I've ever seen the cadets do. I've been on all kinds of different launches. The thing that, well, first of all, Nolan did just a fantastic job of making it where I didn't have to do any work that day. So I'm going to say that was really, really nice. For the most complex payload and the most difficult launch with completely different variables. Yeah, I've been doing this since 2010, and this was quite an impressive launch, and lots of cadets out there to help. Some which maybe didn't help so much, I guess, with the whole battery thing. That's a different story. The thing that I think is interesting is that you were mentioning where I was driving. I have a lot of baggage in my head of because we lost one once. We've only lost one, and we didn't lose this one, but we lost one once in the Long Island Sound it was around 2013, I think, or 2014, 2015, sometime around then. And when we were driving to go retrieve it, we saw that it was headed toward the Long Island Sound. And then luckily one of the cadets, not luckily, but there was a possibility. One of the cadets actually lived on Long Island and said he could retrieve it if it actually landed there. So if you were tracking my car, when you said that, Sebastian, it's funny because I don't know if I really publicly kind of put that out there. That's cool. I have no problem with that, but that's why I leave my tracker on. But the interesting thing about it is I actually came home and we were just sitting there watching APRS trying to figure out, are we just going to lose it completely in the ocean or is it going to come down? And if you see the trajectory of what was happening, it was hitting over, before it got to Foxborough, just before, it was over 100,000 feet and just moving laterally and not vertically. And that was making all of us just like, oh my gosh, like it was.
Oh, I bet. Yeah.
It was super bad, because then it was like we were trying to determine, is it worth driving 3 hours to find out that it's landing in the ocean, or what should we do? And so what the call that we ended up making, which I think was probably best. Luckily, I had somebody else here with me to keep me sane. Major Grammer was amazing and kept me calm, and he said we talked about the various possibilities. The one thing about this specific payload is that after about we only tested it up to about 6 or 7 hours of it transmitting APRS. So the problem is, once it goes below the tree line, as I call it, but you go below 4,000 feet, it falls out of the APRS network unless there's a digipeater nearby, which generally there isn't. So Murphy's Law or it's just statistics, who knows? But if you're not near one, the problem is we needed that last packet, which is what Nolan showed a picture of my radio. So I literally sat there saying, well, we don't know if we'll retrieve it, but if we can get there before the last packet is transmitted, at least we'll know exactly where it landed, which it doesn't seem like much, but I've done this enough times where the difference between where the last packet was and where it landed was several miles away. Like and even when we knew where it was, we walked up to it and we're standing there, and Major Grammer was like, it should be right here. And I look up, and the only reason why we could tell where it was is because one of the pieces had a small LED blue light. And I saw the blue light, and I was like, that's it. Like, as soon as I saw it, I was like, yeah, that's it. It's only 2 of the 3 payloads, but it was that one light that caught my attention, because by the time we got out there, it was dusk. Looking back in time, the only better way for retrieval that I could have done anything was to just continue driving across 84 and driven, assuming that it would come down. And then I would have gotten there about an hour or two before, or hour and a half before it actually landed. Well, maybe, I actually don't know. I was only at home for about an hour and a half, probably. So about an hour and a half, I could have gotten there earlier, which would have given us a little more time. But I tried climbing that tree, and unlike the cadets, I'm too old for that. Apparently, I only got about a quarter. I didn't even get up very far before.
Have you considered adding a mechanism to disconnect the balloon?
Yep.
Like
yeah.
Burn a wire or something.
Absolutely.
Burn a cable or something
Absolutely.
like that.
No.
And also like a bright LED that starts like blinking when the balloon comes down past a certain altitude or something.
So there's several. I can talk about that. So we have this. It's an aluminum machine, custom machine kind of system we had in place. Just the liability and the fear I get in my chest when I would attach something that's supposed to release if it works onto my balloon, and the feeling that I would get if I suddenly let go and then I just have a balloon floating through and my payload on the ground. It gives me a little bit too much anxiety to ever launch it yet. But that would, it has a DTMF control. It works. It's a payload box that we have sitting around. You type 1, 2, 3, 4 in DTMF on a frequency, and then it'll cut the load. Pulls a servo that releases kind of the spring mechanism. People do it automatically with barometers and things like that, but that would work. There's other efforts to turn stuff into DF beacons on the way down as well, so you can DF it as well. I do have to give a quick shout out to Ken 82T for driving out there as well as another ground force. He was trying to DF the balloon based on one of the SSTV frequencies, so I do have him to thank for starting the effort out there.
Well, I think this is a really good overall team effort for this year. I think, in summary, in any type of scientific process, you only want to make one change. I think this year you made too many changes. From changing from helium to hydrogen, to changing the type of the payload, stringing them all together. Just so many variables.
Yep.
I think it's just amazing that you were able to retrieve it, because I gave up after 30 minutes when when it cruised over in my general direction in Poughkeepsie at like 130 miles an hour, I'm watching the trajectory. I think it was about 39,000 feet. And I just had to kind of make that risk reward. Would I be allowed to be away from home for 5 hours round trip? And I'm like, no, that's probably not going to happen. So I turned around, but Ken kept going and going and going like the Energizer Bunny.
That was Valentine's weekend as well. Yep.
But, I think for the launch in April, lots of things to fix, lots of things to change. And I think it's going to be pretty successful. In a way, I'm kind of hoping that you have the same flight path, especially from the Adsb perspective, logging data at probably an average of 60,000 feet for almost 150 miles. That would be a really cool data set to have. So let's hope for another weird windy morning. But most likely,
I'm not sure Stephen agrees with you, but sure.
Now,
it was
actually
forecasted to land in Black Rock too.
Yeah. So, and I know Eric, we're gonna have to send it over to him because he's been on this trip with me a couple of times in the past year. But I just want to say that Nolan did a fantastic job of trying to figure out where it was supposed to go. Clearly, the calculations and the weight measurement, something got off. But in general, what happens in the later part of the year, and I'm only saying this, and I'm not a weather person. I have no idea what the science of this. All I can say is that launching it this early in the year was advantageous to us in the sense that it was going north. Generally, closer to April, when is the ideal time that it's ideal for scheduling reasons, in a sense, and it's also better weather. But launching in April, it generally makes an S and it goes south. Over the past 10 years, we've seen that same kind of pattern. So if we would have had the same length of travel like we did this time, and we did it in April, we definitely would have, it probably would have passed over Long Island. It would have been way out in the ocean. So that's all I can say, but I'll pass it over to Eric, who is, he's come out to I think he came out to some of the last launches that we've done prior to several years ago, and I don't know if he's done any with the SUNY school. I think you're the professor of the SUNY, right?
Right, SUNY New Paltz. I was trying to get us to get a mission going, and then COVID hit and other things. So I'm definitely interested in keeping going on that. The first thing I want to say is congratulations on recovering it, on getting that last packet. I know how relieved you must have been. I was watching it in real time. I saw it go over the house. I almost got in a car too. I saw Steve get in his car and then turn around. I saw you hunting around. And I really did think that, at some point that it was headed out to sea. So congrats on that not happening. My question is actually, I just want to get some more, maybe somehow get a pointer to the group in Boulder, because I am interested in trying to get SUNY New Paltz to also fly something, and it would be useful for me to, if there's public information from the folks in Boulder that I can take a look at.
Yep. So that's eoss.org would be their area.
Okay.
They post. They don't update as much technical information. I think that's just because they don't really care about that too much, because they have other stuff exists within them. They're not really focused on continuity, which is interesting. But hopefully, I'll be working with them and I'll be able to actually continue some of what they're working on. But they have digipeater, their balloon is a digipeater for 6 mobile hotspots on there. They have an Adsb payload on their device that sends out radar packets itself. They know what they're doing out there.
How do you do that with Adsb? Because you've got to have some kind of license. I mean, a pilot's license is a radio license for a piloted craft, but if it's a non-piloted craft,
right? I have to check what launch that was. That was just an experimental payload. It had to be a 250 watt transponder. I think it was experimental through the university, is what I would have to say.
250 watts.
That's the minimum output power for ADSB on 1090 megahertz, which is insane. So I don't know what kind of technology they flew.
So the AVRT5 I've got is 1 watt. That's APRS that we would fly. I mean, I don't know what your KG2K, well, I get that wrong, but what is your transponder? Your APRS? It's a watt?
For APRS, we launched 2 watts, and then ADSB, which is that airplane radar, that has its all regulations.
But you were only receiving ADSB, right?
Yeah, I was only receiving it. They actually transmit those packets, which is, they said, like, if they do that, then they don't even need APRS anymore, if they can track it on ADSB, which is just really interesting, kind of like, what's amateur radio anymore if you're not even using amateur frequencies. But
so another thing I want to say is congratulations on the getting several payloads together, and I guess they still didn't completely stay together. In the 2016 mission, 2 payloads went up and 1 came down. Well, they both came down, but only 1 was recovered. Mm-hmm. And the one that was recovered actually hit a car on landing, and it wasn't styrofoam. It was a 3D printed little. It looked really cool, and luckily parts of it broke away. And luckily the people who were driving the car were really cool about it. When we were thinking about this at SUNY New Paltz, the team I had was working on a selfie camera that would extend on an arm, and so that it could get a picture not looking out but looking in at and see the payload and maybe the envelope or maybe the parachute. And since that was kind of long, it started us thinking about making the thing a little taller. And we went with, the idea was similar in what you did as being modular, but based on Bob Bruniger's idea of little, he sent these pico satellites in Coke bottles. We were playing with 2-liter bottles that would attach to each other and so you'd make a stack. And at the day of the launch, if something wasn't working, you could take it out of the stack really easily. So
yeah, exactly.
This idea of making it modular seems like something to pursue. I don't know if that's the best way. With strings that break, and that's probably what happened in 2016 was that the string was tied onto some metal, and that thing just shook all over the place. We had battery problems also, where the batteries were in a pack and it was just shaken apart and all the batteries spilled out. So things have got to be really, really be tied down, and tying strings between things, there's a lot more stress than we realize, I think.
Yeah, I agree there.
So
yeah, no, I agree with all that. And I think we have the exact same problems with the batteries shaking out and all that. There's what USS does is they have different battery compartments. So like put it in and don't touch it. Just it's one switch or it's one wire you connect, and you don't even have to look at the payload. Nothing that's ever going to change in flight or anything like that.
That's
not. Yeah, we have to use more of those.
And maybe it sounds like a light on the exterior is good for 2 reasons. 1, to confirm that you've got power, and 2, to find it in the dusk at the end of the day.
All right. Well, great side conversation and questions. I think we'll take one other question, and then we'll close it up for the night. Anyone willing to go last question? Sometimes last is the best. So now's your shot. If you've had a question, take yourself off of mute and let's hear what you have to say.
Steve, this is Luke, 82TVS. Just have a quick question. The slide presentation, is it possible? I'd like to maybe just have access to look at it a little more in detail and see, unless it's proprietary and you're not going to let that out. That's basically my question.
Sure. So this is being recorded, so we'll be able to play this back for anyone who wants to go back for the entire video side of it. I'll work with Nolan to get a copy of the slides. We'll integrate into some of the follow-up articles for people to click back and forth. So we'll have everything that you're going to need to play CSI Balloon Sat, Lou.
And I
Yeah,
tried
it's
sending
supposed to
Steve
be
a copy, but the file was corrupted for some reason, so we're working on that a little bit more. I have them on my computer, but Steve couldn't view them, so we'll see what's going on.
Yep. So we'll get that all sorted out
Yeah,
for
that's
everybody. And then just quickly before we close, since this was a very APRS driven use case and application, next week on March 8th, which is a Tuesday at 7 p.m., one of the other local Hudson Valley clubs, the Overlook Mountain Amateur Radio Club, has a special guest presenter, John WA1KLI, who is very close with the late Bob Bruninger, WB4 APR, who's the father of APRS. And he's very involved in a event called the Appalachian Trail Golden Packet event, which is happening in July. And I'll be part of that at Sam's Point, helping to bounce a 9600 baud packet from one end to the other of the Appalachian Trail, which is 2,500 miles. And so that's going to be a really cool event. So we'll be having a presentation about the basics of APRS and then getting into a little bit of the details behind Golden Packet. So if anyone's interested in that, take a look at the HVDN website, and we'll also share it out through all sorts of the other usual media forms here in the Hudson Valley area of New York. So again, thank you, Nolan, for all the hard work, and congratulations on the upcoming graduation. And thank you, Stephen, for helping to coach and mentor the cadets. And you'll have your work cut out for you next year after you don't have Nolan with you. So hopefully there's somebody who's going to be taking his place waiting in the wings. So again, thank you everyone who attended, and I'm going to hit stop record and close the meeting.